Hello everyone, welcome to this session in Psychology Made Easy. Today our talk about research methods part 1. First question: which of the following research methods doesn't permit researchers to draw conclusion regarding cause and effect relationship? Experimental research, surveys, case studies, correlational research, naturalistic observation. Yes, the answer is correlational research. Correlational research employs statistical method. It just examines a relationship between two or more variables, but doesn't permit researchers to draw conclusion. Correlations doesn't mean causation, while experimental research offers the opportunity to draw conclusion because of the strict control of variables. In research methods, in any study, when we see control, we can draw a conclusion. 2. A random sample can be best defined as a sample in which each potential participant has an equal chance of being selected, a sample that is carefully chosen so the characteristics of a participant correspond to the larger population, selection of cases from a larger population, selection of cases from control group, a sample of larger population from the experimental group. When we talk about a random sample, we talk about equal chance of being selected. So the answer is A. Random sample, a sample in which each potential participant, each subject has an equal chance of being selected. However, a sample that is carefully chosen so the characteristics of participant correspond to larger population, this is number B. This is a representative sample. A representative sample. Selection of cases from a larger population, this is called sample. 3. The Hawthorne effect is best defined as expectation by the experimenter that can influence the results of an experiment, changing the results of an experiment when it is blind versus double blind, the idea that people will alter their behavior because of the researcher's attention and not because of actual treatment, specific testable prediction derived from a theory, the idea that subject in an experiment will lie if the researcher tells them to. The Hawthorne effect is the idea that people will alter their behavior. Here people alter their behavior because of the researcher attention. Because of the researcher attention. This is called Hawthorne effect. Dr. Paisel conducts an experiment to see whether hunger makes mice run faster through a maze. So he randomly assigned 25 mice to a control group or an experimental group, which cannot be a confounding variable. Which cannot be a confounding variable. Okay. Where the experiment takes place, how hungry the mice were before the experiment, how fast the mice are before the race, when the experiment takes place, the population from which he selected the mice. Okay. The population from which he selected the mice can't be a confounding variable here. A confounding variables means factors other than the independent variable. As you know, in a research study we have independent variable which influence or impact another variable. We called it the dependent one. Okay, so confounding variable is other factors other than the independent variable that influences the dependent variable or alter the effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable. Okay, how fast and hungry the mice here in this experiment at the beginning of the experiment are potential confounding variable. If some of the mice was very hungry and some others are very fast, this can affect the result of the experiment. Also, when and where the race takes place are also possible confounding variable, can change the finding of this experiment. The population from which the mice were selected can't be a confounding variable because all of mice were chosen from the same population. Here we want to discuss confounding bias and confounding variables. We see here that confounding variable factor other than the independent variable. We take this example. As you know, cancer pancreas, here is incidence of cancer pancreas is the dependent variable. Smoking is cancer pancreas is the dependent variable. Smoking in is the independent variable. So cancer pancreas can occur more in smokers than non-smoker. Here the independent variable is smoking. Okay, here we see an association between smoking and coffee drinking. There is association between them. Those who smoke tend to drink coffee more, and also we observe that there is a correlation or association, another term, between coffee drinking and cancer pancreas. So when to say that there is a confounding bias? As we see, smoking is a known risk factor for pancreatic cancer. Smoking is associated with coffee drinking, but not a result of coffee drinking, as you know. Number 3, I observed association between coffee drinking and pancreatic cancer. However, in reality, coffee drinking is not actual risk factor for cancer pancreas. Not actual risk factor. It's just a confounding variable that can alter the results of a study. 5. Mark collected survey data about number of hours that colleague students study for finals and their grades. His data indicates that students who spend more time studying for finals tend to do better than other students. What can Mark now conclude from this survey? Studying improves student grade on a final exam. A relationship exists between studying and exam grades. A significant relationship exists between studying and grades. Students who don't study for final exam will not do well on those exams. Students with higher IQs tend to study more than those with lower IQs. Okay, Mark can conclude here that there is a relationship exists between studying and exam grades. Mark has just established a relationship between the time spent in studying and the final grades. he didn't conduct an experiment, therefore he can't draw any conclusion. So when we want to draw any conclusion, we have to do experiment, not just survey data. Mark has found a correlation between studying and performance on final exam. Whether or not it is significant would require the use of inferential statistics. Here there is no inferential statistics and there is no experiment to conclude that. 6. Jordan runs an experiment testing effects of sugar consumption on aggression levels in children. He randomly assigned 20 subjects either to the control group given sugar-free candy or experimental group that was given the same candy that did contain sugar. He then tests the subject response to several different puzzles, each with increasing difficulty. Jordan hypothesized that sugar level do play a role in aggression in children. In order to know whether his hypothesis has been supported, Jordan will need to use descriptive statistics, means-to-end statistics, experimental research, scatter plot, inferential statistics. Here the answer is inferential statistics. When we want to test a hypothesis, we need inferential statistics. So Jordan need to use inferential statistics to determine whether the experimental group's aggression levels were significantly different or not. Of course, he could use descriptive statistics, but not before he determines whether his hypothesis has been supported and represents the larger population. Which of the following coefficient of correlation indicates the weakest relationship between two variables? Coefficient of correlation, we called it R. Okay. This is the weakest relationship between two variables. Okay, correlational research allows the researcher to determine whether a relationship exists between two variables or not. It searches about a relationship. A positive correlation means that high scores on one variable tend to be paired with high score on the other variable. For example, if we found a positive correlation between body weight and systolic blood pressure, with the increase in the body weight, the systolic blood pressure increased. This is called positive correlation. Correlation coefficient, take a number between -1 and +1. This number expresses the strength of the correlation. The strength of correlation. A negative correlation is the opposite of positive correlation, means that high scores on one variable tend to be paired with low scores on the other variable. The number 0, coefficient of correlation 0, denotes the weakest possible correlation or no correlation at all. No correlation at all. So when we come close to 1 or -1, this is a strong correlation. When we close to 0, this is a weak correlation. The observation in a classroom that the higher the room temperature, the lower the student performance, would be an example of observation in a classroom that the higher the room temperature, the lower the student performance, would be an example of negative correlation, because the higher the temperature, the lower the performance. This is negative correlation. A negative correlation expressed as -1 to less than 0. This means that as one variable goes up, the other variable will go down. In this case, as the room temperature went up, the student performance went down, indicating a negative correlation. In an experiment, Sydney is going to investigate how alcohol affects aggression. The number of alcohol drinks the subject has is called. So here there are two variables. One is the number of alcoholic drinks, the other is the aggression. Okay, the number of alcoholic drinks is called controlled variable, independent variable, dependent variable, experimental variable, positive variable. Of course, it is called independent variable, which can affect the dependent variable, which here is the aggression. Here is the dependent variable. Independent variable is the variable that is manipulated. You increase it or decrease it to test its effects on the other dependent variable, here the aggression. In this experiment, the manipulation of the number of alcoholic drinks will affect their level of aggression. Dependent variable is measured to see how it is changed from the manipulation of the independent variable. So we measure aggression to see how is manipulation of the number of alcoholic drinks, which is the independent variable, affect it. Okay, 10. If a researcher is trying to establish a causal relationship between eating breakfast and work performance, the researcher should use which of the following method of research? We want to establish a causal relationship. Okay, case study, correlational research, experimental research, survey, statistics. Okay, causal relationship, so it is experimental research. Experimental research. With experimental research, the strict control variables offer the researcher the opportunity to draw a conclusion about cause and effect relationship. In experimental research, always there is a study group and control group. So this controlling of variable offer the opportunity to draw a conclusion. If a researcher wants to establish a causal relationship between eating breakfast and work performance, he needs to do experimental research. Correlational research doesn't allow the researcher to draw a conclusion, just say that there is a relation but not causation, and can't draw conclusion from correlational research. Surveys simply allow the researcher to gather an immense amount of data in a short period of time. Okay. Number 11. A teacher wants to determine the impact of teaching style on quiz scores. To do this, she divided a class into two groups, teached one group using one style and the other group using a second different style. She then administered each group the same set of quizzes and compares the result. So in this study, the researcher makes two groups with two different teaching style and with the same quiz at last. The independent variable here is she wants to determine the impact of teaching style on quiz scores. So the independent variable is teaching style. Teaching style. Okay. In an experiment, the independent variable is controlled and altered to test its effect on dependent variable. We called it manipulated. In this case, teaching style is the dependent variable, while the groups are controlled. They are not manipulated and measured as a variable. Okay. The quiz score are the dependent variable because the results are dependent on changes in the teaching style. So the quiz score depends on change in teaching style. So because the quiz score dependent on teaching style we called it dependent variable, and the teaching style called it independent variable. The teacher here is a researcher conducting the study. 12. Researcher decides to study how students in a classroom respond to positive feedback from their teacher by watching the classroom via a one-way mirror. This method of an obtrusive viewing of behavior in its usual setting is referred to as a longitudinal study, a case study, a controlled experiment, remote viewing, naturalistic observation. Of course, it is a naturalistic observation. You observe the subjects without they know that you are observing them. So it is called naturalistic observation. Here researcher observe participant in a natural environment without the participant being aware. Longitudinal study is a research design that examines variable or participant over time. So longitudinal study we used it over time. We called it also a cohort study. A case study is an in-depth detailed examination of an individual or a small group. We called it a case study. A controlled experiment is a research design that manipulates variable to study cause and effect. Remote viewing is term associated with psychic abilities, not scientific research. 13. If a teacher gives a test in two different classes and the score in the second class have a larger standard deviation, which of the following must be true? Larger standard deviation. We know in descriptive statistics that there are some statistical measures that test the central tendency and some test the spread or the dispersion of the data. Standard deviation, one of the tests is to test the dispersion or spread of data. So standard deviation here is large, means that the score in the first class are closer to the mean. Of course, standard deviation larger in the second class, so it is away from the mean, but in the first is smaller standard deviation, so the scores in the first class are closer to the mean. It's a measure of how far data spread out from the mean of the data. The smaller the standard deviation, the closer the data is to the mean and vice versa. Because the scores in the second class have a larger standard deviation, the scores deviates more from the mean. Without additional information, it is impossible to know whether both classes share the same mean score or whether the mean is larger in one of the classes. 14. Which of the following would likely not be allowed based on current ethical principle for doing a psychological research? This is about ethics. Which is not allowed here? Participants gave informed consent and are debriefed. Debriefing is telling the participants about the results of the study after the study being conducted. This is called debriefing. Participants gave informed consent but are deceived before being debriefed. Participants don't give informed consent but are debriefed after the study. Participants give in full disclosure but are not able to tell the independent from the dependent variable. Participants are not told exactly what the exact but give informed consent and are debriefed. Here the answer is participants don't give informed consent but are debriefed after the study. Of course, it is unethically that participants don't give informed consent. They should give informed consent unless it is given explicit permission from the institutional review board. Institutional review board, they are the group of the institute in which the study is done. They are expert. This group or committee supervise the study scientifically and ethically. Unless giving explicit permission from the IRB, an experiment should not be performed without informed consent. Deception is possible as long as there is informed consent and a full debriefing afterward to avoid response bias. Sometimes researchers use deception in their study. Deception here can mean lie for the study about which product they took, because to ameliorate their effect on their response. This is called response bias. We want to avoid it, so sometimes we use deception, but we use deception, we have to take informed consent and make a full debriefing afterward for those cases. Researchers are not required to tell participants exactly what they should expect, and the participants do not need to know the variables being tested. Okay, that's enough for now. Thank you and see you soon. In our next topic is research methods part 2. Research method part 2. Goodbye and have a nice day.